It started in Liverpool, England, a sound of feeling and emotion. It started in Liverpool, England, and swept up the youth of the world.
I'm so excited. 60 years ago, I'm old enough to remember February 9th, 1964. The day before, on February 8th, I was into Little League and baseball. The next night, February 9th, Sunday night, I watched the Ed Sullivan Show, lying on the floor of my neighbor's living room, and everything changed from then on. Now, I'm here, like so many others on YouTube and in the world, around the world, to celebrate, possibly, or to promote, possibly, or to criticize, possibly, Capitals, Apples, the Beatles, new reissue of the American US albums from 1964. This is the box set. Now, I don't like shrink wrap, so I'm taking the shrink wrap off. You don't need to see the hype sticker. There are plenty other unboxing videos. I don't do unboxing videos going page by page. You can get that elsewhere, and it's fun. You should look at those videos. They're all around. Just Google the Beatles, and you'll find a million of them. But I want to talk about this set because I was a little skeptical about it. I am that first generation that got the albums, and over the last week or two, actually several weeks, I've been listening to my original copies, and I have original mono copies, multiples in some cases. I have stereo, I have the Capitol ones, I have the United Artists Hard Day's Night, I have the VJ, which isn't in here, but we'll talk about that a little bit. But I will show you the packaging a little bit, talk about that, talk to you about some of the inserts, and I want to tell you how these sound. And I listened to them straight through in order. And first of all, let me give you the punchline first. I was pleasantly surprised. They sound really good. I'll go through them one by one. Slipcase. Now, I'm sure you've heard, those of you who are interested in this, that you can buy these individually. Maybe you should. If you don't buy them individually, you get the box and the documentary, which most people don't need, a double album that Capitol put out late in 1964 as a, someone would say a cash grab. I hate the term cash grab, but of course they were there to make money. That's what record companies do, make money for themselves and behalf of their artists. And think about this, 1964, we didn't have the internet. We got some teen magazines, we got anything with the Beatles on the cover, a couple of paperback books here and there, but that told us the story. It's like a documentary. Now, it's probably unnecessary and it's kind of kitsch when you listen to it straight through. I did listen to it last week. I didn't listen to the new one, but it's $130 more just to get that and the box set, so you might as well buy them separately. But I bought the box set. I am a fan of these records. Now, I want to say also right off the bat, for you wankers out there bitching that that's not the way the Beatles intended, against the artist's creativity and everything else, and they bastardized those Beatle records and cut them up and put them out differently in America and North America and Mexico and many other countries. You're absolutely right, they did. It wasn't the artist's intent. But you know, I will say this for Dave Dexter. Dave Dexter's the producer in the day at Capitol Records that changed the whole thing of these records. Now, Capitol initially passed. I would say, if you really want to know more about this and you're not buying this record, check out the books, any of the books, but this one especially. And there's, I think, a new updated small version of these 1964 records by Bruce Spicer. He's the guy. He's the guy that has written about the Beatles and the various labels and the various pressings. He knows his shit better than I do, and I would sit here for 6 hours telling you, and it wouldn't be half as good. Now, what's great about these, there's inserts in every record with an essay from Bruce Spicer talking about the release and how Dave Dexter and Capitol put these out. And what they would do back in 1964, back in the day, American labels would have to pay publishing based on the amount of songs. So where in the UK they would pay per album, and they would usually have 14 songs, in America they had 11 or 12 songs. So there was more profit to be made for the label by having to pay out less in publishing and royalties in that way, in that respect. So that made sense. Also in the UK, their whole thing about value. The Beatles and Parlophone didn't want to put singles on the albums, thinking we don't want kids to buy the single and then go buy the album again. Well, in America, we liked having those singles on albums. Sure, we bought the singles and we bought the albums, but after that, you'd play the albums if you were an album person like I was. To me, these were essential. Also, Dave Dexter knew what Americans wanted in terms of sound. Radio was completely different here. Teenagers and young adults were driving in cars, getting in cars, going around. These are how we like to hear the records on the radio. We liked them jacked up a little bit. We liked a reverb occasionally added. These were in mono, of course. Stereo was like 10% of the sales audience back then, but we wanted these records. I didn't really think of mono versus stereo, except for the fact the stereos cost $1 more. And it wasn't until the end of 1964, which I'll talk about when I talk about one of the albums in this collection, that I actually had my own stereo in my room. The first year, 1964, I was playing these on a hi-fi, my father's hi-fi, in the living room. And after a while, my parents got tired of that. And for Christmas, Hanukkah of 1964, I got a stereo and one of these records. And I loved it. First of all, I'm going to go in order. Obviously with Meet the Beatles first. Now, this is my original copy of Meet the Beatles. I have several. You can see this is bent, well played. My original mono. I have stereo. I have several monos. And you can see this blue insert. What's great about the new versions, they have a separate exact insert. So this is the exact insert. Look at this. It's exactly the same. And they did a really nice, it's actually thicker paper here, which is fine. But this is what they look like. You'd have promos for all the other records out at the time. And so you have these, which is kind of a nice added bonus. You have the actual record that comes in the polyline sleeve, and you have the original Capitol Rainbow record in America. These records are amongst the flattest, quietest, best pressings I've had in a long time. Not one issue, hardly a click. I don't even remember a click. You have in every record a separate insert of the tape. And this essay, an essay by Bruce Spicer. Now I did not check. I assume these are the same. It's basically writing he's taken from his books. Various books of his, but they're well worth reading. So if you are getting these records, you don't have to get those books, but I think support that. He self-publishes those books. So I'll put a link below to Bruce Spicer's site, because they're amazing books. There's a whole collection. Some of them are out of print, but you can download, I think, reader versions of it. So I highly recommend that. The Audio Master lacquers were cut by Kevin Reeves. And before this happened, a lot of us were kind of nervous. And if you're watching Kevin, or anyone who knows Kevin, tell him to recut those terrible Jellyfish records that he did last year. I don't know what went wrong with those. They were supposedly all analog, and those are terrible. He did a great job here. So whatever you say, dissing these American versions, and I do like the UK versions better, but the majority of human beings in the world heard these versions more than any other versions. And these stayed in print for 25 years until the 1988 or so, when the CDs came out, and Capitol then in America adapted the British form and did their vinyl versions. They switched from the American dexterized configurations like Meet the Beatles, Beatles' second album. They deleted those and matched them up with the UK versions as the Beatles intended. But for 25 years, this is what we got. Now the mono, obviously, the monos were discontinued around 1968. So there's only that those 5 years or so that we had, not even that we have the mono versions of these. And those are the days, obviously, stereo, where you get the vocals on one side, one channel, and the instruments, for the most part, on the left channel. Interesting thing about these, I would say the cover printing is not as good as the originals. You can't really see, it doesn't show here, but there's a little more contrast, even though it's a tone. Obviously, it's different tone than on the original with the Beatles, this great Robert Freeman photograph, but the tone is different and it's a little, little crunchier on the new version. But interesting enough, they did recreate the proper color. As you can see, the Beatles, pretty close, a little off, not exact, but I have no problem with that. But remember, back in the day, if you don't know this, look at all the different colors. They changed the colors of the Beatles. So there were various colors of the Beatles depending on the various plants and times these were printed. And, America was totally right on of putting their name in the top section where they would stand out in the record bins of the day, whether it's department stores or hi-fi shops. So Dave Dexter knew his shit back then. Now, one other thing about the packaging. In the beginning, they would be these tip-on jackets, and obviously this is the original. That's a little beat up here. This is an early stereo pressing. As you can see, the square paper was pasted on the cardboard, and you can see that pretty close there where that gap is. Later in the 70s, they would do wraparound printing like this. This is actually a sealed American copy from the 1980s, but it's just a print around right on the cardboard, okay? So we're used to that. That's pretty much what they did with this new version. They did actually a pretty nice job, glossy job. Not my first choice, but, well done. I would say the imagery isn't quite as great as the originals there. But one thing, I'm disappointed in that because I want to show this for as an example. This is Rhino, and when they did their Summer of Love series in 2017, celebrating 50 years of the Summer of Love 1967, and they did several records, including The Association and this Beau Brummell's psychedelic masterpiece in a way. And you notice how part of the reason they were the Beau Brummels, B-E-A-U, it comes right after the Beatles in the bins. How great was that, right? Smart thinking. Remember Laugh, Laugh, I Thought I'd Die? But this was a reissue that Rhino did, and they did these beautiful tipped-on jackets. This is a mono, beautiful heavy cover. Look at that kind of matte, semi-matte, a little, it's not a gloss finish, it's a semi-matte finish. This is beautiful. This is what Capitol should have done. Paid the extra 25 cents. If it cost extra, I don't know, but this would have been amazing. That would have made them perfect from my point of view. Now let's talk about the sound of these. First of all, going back to you that just are so upset that Capitol put these out and the Beatles allowed them to put out the American versions. I'm not going to compare these to the UK mono box. That's a whole different beast. Now, these were cut from the American master tapes. Those are the tapes, probably in reality, around third generation tapes. Now, that was common. Every time we bought a British band's album back in the day, we got at least one or two dubs down. Same with vice versa. Those in the UK with American bands, they got one or two dubs down, maybe even more sometimes, because tapes really weren't sent around the world in the same way. They'd make a dub and send the dub around. Now, Dexter got these, and he did his EQing, the changing EQing, again, sometimes reverb. Now, some of these are fold down from stereo to mono. Some are original mono recordings. You can find that in the Spicer books. I'm also going to put a link down to Michael Fremer's review in the Tracking Angle. He talks a little bit about that, so you can kind of get a better sense of it, because I don't want to go in detail. I don't even know the detail track by track, and it doesn't matter for the sake of this. But Kevin Reeves took these tapes, the generation, the master tapes that Capitol has in the American vaults, owned by Universal now, and did an amazing job. These sound better than the originals because the originals had a compromise in those days. Take a little bass out, take some highs out, because we'd have these small record players and they would skip, like the famous Led Zeppelin thing in the early 70s when Robert Ludlum would cut that, and it was so loud and so intense, it would knock the needle off. And that would happen too. And Beatles would be just the same. They're no Led Zeppelin, but these rock, and these are great. So there's more bass, not bloated. You hear McCartney's bass, you hear more of the cymbals of Ringo Starr, but you just hear great rock and roll. And again, as these pressings are quiet, I could crank these mothers up, and they sounded really, really good. And I tell you, this proves one more time, you don't need me to say this, what great rock and roll singers both Paul McCartney and John Lennon were. And I know a lot of people, there's a segment, I should say, not a lot, but maybe a lot, a segment of people prefer the second half of the Beatles, the Blue Album Beatles over the Red Album Beatles, where like Rubber Soul, Revolver, and they get more psychedelic and earthy and mature. But I tell you, this is the stuff that I remember, and listening to these straight through all day today, it brought me back to 1964. Now, these recordings were Love Me Do from late 62, I guess, but 63 and 64. Now, these records were released up till early 65, but it's essentially the music from 1964, and that is that year. It's amazing how many records came out that year and how many number ones they had and how many friggin' records they sold. So Meet the Beatles, really great. Opening up with I Want to Hold Your Hand. This is an incredibly sequenced album. I saw her standing there right back to back, ends on side one with All My Lovin', opens up side two with the George Harrison song, Don't Bother Me. Hold Me Tight is on here. Just great writing. It's amazing, too, how fast they were writing these songs back then, especially Lennon and McCartney. Then there's the Beatles' second album, possibly the greatest rock and roll album. In fact, definitely the best rock and roll album the Beatles ever released. A lot of covers on this, but this again shows that those great vocals by John and Paul on here with some great, great covers, opening up with Roll Over Beethoven, Great version of that. You Really Got a Hold on Me. Thank You, Girls. There's some originals too. Devil in Her Heart. Money. I mean, John's vocals, he's screaming this like it's his last day. These are songs that they have been doing for a while, from Hamburg to Liverpool. They knew these songs. Paul's Long Tall Sally, give me a break. That is sublime, and it's rocking as hell. I Call Your Name. Please, Mr. Postman. I mean, wait. The girl groups, the soul groups. I'll Get You, and closing out with She Loves You. Again, Dave Dexter did an amazing job sequencing these. Only 11 tracks here again. Forget the value thing. It's quality, not quantity here. Yes, if you start comparing it to British albums, it's a whole different world. But this is what I grew up with, and most of us in America of my age grew up with. This is a fantastic. Again, you have the equivalent insert here. In this case, another blue insert. This is the same insert from Meet the Beatles, because this was followed close behind. One thing that's really interesting here, I noticed on several of these tape box photographs, are these sticky notes. Now, a conspiracy theorist would say, oh my God, that can't be right. That must be fake. Sticky notes weren't invented until 1977, and this is a record from 1964, huh? But if you look here, it says acetate, do not bake. You know about baking tapes. If you don't know, Google that. But you have here digitally archived. So my guess is when they digitally archived the entire catalog, someone put these sticky notes on, which they left. Interesting that they left it. So that's probably going back to the 1980s. So it's not digital, and it's not from 1964. Those sticky notes, they weren't invented. Romy and Michelle invented them in 1977. See what I did there? These are cut all analog, an analog signal. They get into this whole thing and how they used a Neumann VM S70 cutting lathe, originally installed in Capitol Studios in 1971. All analog cutting technique there, okay? In writing, proof, tape proof. No conspiracy theories. Again, another really wonderful record. I think these sound really good. Again, they're richer than the originals by quite a bit. Now, this is the one that blew me away. I think out of the entire series, this is the best sounding. Not quite sure why. I know this has this is a soundtrack opposed to just a list of songs from the movie. We all know now, most of you know probably, that in the UK, A Hard Day's Night was a list of songs. Side one from the movie, side two, other songs from that time period. In America, United Artists originally put this out. It was not on Capitol Records because they had the movie, they produced the movie, they financed the movie produced by Walter Shenson, and part of the deal was they get the soundtrack. So they get, what is it, the 6 songs on here, and or 7 songs or whatever it is, mixed in with several instrumentals, scored, arranged by George Martin. And it really covers the Beatles songs in this kind of hipster, jazzy 1964 way. Songs like A Hard Day's Night, I Should Have Known Better instrumental. That's kind of groovy saxophone. There's like a guitar, almost like the James Bond low bassy guitar venture style, as like the James Bond theme on here, on the Ringo's theme, This Boy, when Ringo's walking along the river there with the camera, and it fits in here. And those, I think, as I recall, are true mono mixes, where a lot of these, some of the others, it's hit and miss again, what is fold downs and what is original mono, full mono mixes. But this is the best sounding record. I was blown away. This sounds really good. Again, it has the insert. I don't have to go through every insert here, but you get the insert and you get the United Artists cover. Now, those of you who are saying, why is a United Artists record in a Capitol box set? Because it's 1964, and also in the late 70s, Capitol Records acquired United Artists. So those of you who collect Beatle records, you'll probably notice that in the late 70s, Hard Day's Night labels were on Capitol at that point, not United Artists. But you got the inserts. Again, you got the Bruce Spicer essay. But the guitars on here, the acoustic guitars, for instance, on And I Love Her that George plays, just really beautiful. The difference with these American records, they got balls. They got American balls rather than British balls, and it works. These work really well. I'm pumped. I'm pumped, as you can probably tell. Now, this was a record, again, Capitol put out. What happened is the original Hard Day's Night came out, but after so many months, Capitol was allowed to put out some of the Hard Day's Night songs, and they had another excuse, again, to milk the cow, milk it, and take some songs off British albums. Again, within the essays here, Bruce Spicer talks about where he took these songs from, what he saved. It wasn't always accidental. I think Beatles' second album might have been an accidental, amazing record. Did he think of it as a rock and roll record or just happened to take those things? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But obviously you have some tracks on here, so this sounds really good too. A shot from the Ed Sullivan Show. Again, same thing, tipped on jackets. I won't talk much about this, but as I said at the beginning of this is what taught us about this Beatles story. Before we got that little book by, was it Billy Shepard? I think was the first bio book in 1964, and magazines. And this kind of told us, it started in Liverpool, England. You know, a docudrama. Sounds like LA radio. This is the only gatefold. And this is the one you only get if you get the box. And that's fine. It's an extra. It's not as bad. It's kind of a fun thing. It's kind of a kitsch, look back, way back machine type record, The Beatles Story. Again, something that you can't even understand how great it was to get that record. And yes, it was a cash grab maybe. I hate the term cash grab. Now, Beatles 65. This is a very special record for me. In that review, Michael Fremer thought this one was bright. He liked the sound of these records, just like me, but he thought this one was the brightest. I didn't feel that as much. Obviously, we have different rigs, different systems. I like the mood of the opening of this. This is the closest to Beatles for Sale, the UK Beatles for Sale. Now, I like what they did with the cover with the Four Seasons on here. These photographs were taken by Robert Whittaker, who also did the Butcher cover photograph. He did a series of sessions, photo promo sessions with the Beatles, including some sort of avant-garde surrealist type of imagery. And I love what he did here. Again, another thing about putting the Beatles name up in front so it stands out in the bins in record stores of the day and hi-fi stores. Beatles 65, again, closer to Beatles for Sale. I love the warmth of the first two Lennon vocals on here. No Reply and I'm a Loser. This record I got for Hanukkah. December 1964 with my first hi-fi. A Magnavox, you pull it down, you can stack them, the speakers pivoted out. When I got this record as a kid at 10 years old, this sounded so good. I'd never heard a record sounding so good when I was a 10-year-old. And I think they pulled it off really well here. Again, I like those songs. Baby in Black is a beautiful waltz on here. Of course, Paul's I'll Follow the Sun, just great acoustic guitar on that. And the song that everyone loves to hate, so many people I've met in my entire lifetime say the one song I just can't stand is John Lennon singing Mr. Moonlight. I friggin' love that. I love that organ, that just like huge, giant, I think it's so cool. And his vocals on that is so cool. Honey Don't, of course, Ringo doing it. I'll Be Back Again. The great acoustic guitar, they sound really good on this pressing. Again, fuller, richer. I don't think there's anything wrong, considering what these tapes are, the third generation probably, and what Dave Dexter did. Really good. Now, lastly, the early Beatles. Now, this is a shot that Robert Freeman took. This was a picture from the cover of the Beatles for Sale. Dave Dexter was really into using pictures and not duplicating exactly what the Brits were doing. Obviously, taking things from different albums. He had leftover parts and pieces. Some things were not even included and used later on the rarities way into the 1970s. This came out in 1965. So people say, why is this included if it's 65 and this is a 64 box? Because the songs were from 63, 64. These are most of the songs that were on Introducing the Beatles on the label that VJ put out at the get-go during the Beatle invasion, because they got a exclusivity for, I think, 6 or 8 months to put out, or maybe even a year, and they started early, the end of 63. I don't remember exactly. But once that expired, Capitol had to jump in and take those songs that they weren't able to put out, and they put out the early Beatles. And I remember getting this in 65. Of course, I'd have to get everything. And of course, the songs were songs I ever had, but it sounded better than the VJ. VJ was notorious for bad pressings. Cool records in a way, terrible album cover they did back then. But again, big type, masthead up here, so you see it in the bins. And I tell you, this is one of the better sounding records too. I was surprised, considered this is earlier tracks. This sounded really good in this cut. Opens up with Love Me Do, which was never a favorite song of mine. Obviously, their first single in England goes into Twist and Shout. And of course, you can't deny the great vocal John does on that. Anna, amazing song, cover song. Chains, cover song. Boys, cover song. And Ask Me Why ends that. And I just love Ask Me Why, a song that a lot of people don't think of. Then, of course, side 2 opens up with Please, Please Me, their first #1 in the UK. P.S. I Love You, Baby It's You, John's vocal on that. Now, I did notice on here something. I was waiting for it because every version I've heard of this, halfway through the songs, and I don't know if it's the way it's cut, but it's not. It goes back. It's not just on these new cuts. The volume increases in the middle of that song or after the first minute. And Baby, It's You, and it cuts up. You can notice it. Now that I told you, you're never going to unhear it. Baby, but it doesn't bother me because I anticipate it all the time. Of course, the Taste of Honey, the vocals on that, and that strum of guitars at the beginning, just really, really, just really appetizing on that. And Do You Want to Know a Secret? I always liked George's pronunciation and the way he sings on that song. I just love it. It has the various insert. I didn't show every single one, but it has the insert that Capitol would have put out at the first release, promoting other records. You get, again, your great Capitol records, Swirl, and you get the wonderful essay by Bruce Spicer, and you get the insert. Capitol did a great job on this. I can't believe it. That's right. If those of you who are Beatle freaks know that Capitol fucked up 15 years ago or 12 years ago, whenever it was, on the CD Capitol. They put volume 1 and 2 of Capitol things, never put out volume 3, used the right things, used horrible packaging, that little fold out pack, terrible, but you'd have the individual cardboard sleeves in. Then later, Okay, they didn't finish. They copped out. They didn't do Yesterday and Today. But later, number of years later, they did that blue box. I don't have it here, of the Capitol years. But they used the masters, the UK masters. So the right sequencing, the wrong versions of the songs. They fucked up. And they'd finally do it right here. So thank you, Jeffrey Jones. Thank you, Apple. Thank you, Olivia and Yoko and Sean and Danny and whoever worked on this. And Kevin, Kevin Reeves, you did a good job. Project producer, Guy Hayden. Thank you. I don't know who you are, but phone me. Let's chat about these. I hope they do next year another set because we have to get the American Rubber Soul. We have to. Now, if they do a 50th anniversary Rubber Soul, everybody wants the friggin' remix. I'm not a huge fan of those, but okay, do the remix and put in an analog cut, okay, of the stereo, please, or mono, but put in the American configuration too, because it's better. I don't care what you say. It's organic, it's woodsy, it's folky, it's Americana before Americana was invented. It's so good. The American Rubber Soul surpasses. Now, I know when you're used to one, it's not the same, but put both. We can have both. Thank you. Put your comments below. Great job here. And if you're one of those people that say it blows, cash grab, move on. Go watch some, Frigid Pink video someone does. Mazzy loves you. Take care, everyone.